I never thought the person I trusted most would be the reason I had to protect everything we built together. For 17 years, I believed my marriage was the safest place in my life, but one unexpected notification on my phone made me question everything I thought I knew. My name is Daniel Brooks, and before that moment, I believed I understood what trust meant. I was 45 years old, living in Denver, Colorado, and I had spent most of my adult life building a stable future for my family. I owned a small construction consulting business, and every decision I made was based on one goal: creating a secure life for the people I loved. My wife, Emily, had been beside me through years of challenges, changes, and sacrifices. We were not a perfect couple, but we had built something I was proud of. We bought our home together, planned our future together, and saved carefully for the years ahead. To me, our savings account was not just money sitting in a bank. It represented every early morning, every difficult choice, and every time we chose long-term security over temporary comfort. It represented the life we promised each other we would create. That was why the message I received on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon felt impossible to understand. I was sitting in my office reviewing project notes when my phone displayed a banking alert. At first, I barely noticed it. Financial notifications were common, and I assumed it was another routine update. But when I opened it and saw information that did not match anything I remembered approving, my attention immediately changed. I looked at the details again, hoping I had misunderstood what I was seeing. There were changes connected to our accounts that I did not recognize. My first emotion was not anger. It was confusion. I wanted there to be an easy explanation. I wanted to believe there was a simple misunderstanding between Emily and me. After all, this was the woman I had shared nearly 2 decades of my life with. The woman who knew my dreams, my worries, and the sacrifices behind everything we had built. I did not want to believe she would make a decision involving our future without telling me. But the more I looked at the information, the more uncomfortable I became. Something had changed, and I was not part of that change. That evening, when Emily came home, everything looked completely normal. She walked through the door, asked about my day, and talked about ordinary things. The house felt exactly the same. The pictures on the walls, the familiar rooms, and the memories we created together were all still there. But inside my mind, something felt different. I watched the person I loved and wondered if there was a part of our life together that I had not seen. I did not know the full story yet. I did not know why those financial changes happened or what Emily was thinking. But I knew one thing. For the first time in 17 years, I felt like I was standing outside a door to my own marriage, waiting for someone to explain what was happening on the other side. And that unanswered question would become the beginning of a conversation neither of us could avoid. The next morning, I woke up hoping that the strange feeling from the previous day would disappear. I wanted to believe that after a night of rest, everything would make more sense. I wanted to believe there was a simple explanation waiting for me. But when I checked the information again, the uncertainty was still there. I was not looking for a reason to accuse Emily. After 17 years together, she deserved more than a rushed assumption. What I needed was clarity. I needed to understand why decisions connected to our shared future had happened without a conversation between us. I spent the morning trying to focus on my business, but my mind kept returning to the same questions. I reviewed the details carefully, looking for something I might have missed. I thought about every possibility that could explain what I was seeing. Maybe Emily had misunderstood something. Maybe there was a situation she was handling that she had not had a chance to explain yet. Maybe there was a reason that would make everything feel normal again. But the longer I looked, the more I realized this was not something I could simply ignore. It was not just about numbers on a screen. It was about the feeling that I had been left out of something that affected both of us. Throughout our marriage, Emily and I had always talked about important decisions. We discussed our home, our plans, our goals, and the future we wanted to create. That was what made this situation so difficult for me. It was not only the financial activity itself. It was the silence surrounding it. I started thinking about the months before that moment. Looking back, I noticed small signs that I had overlooked. Emily had seemed more thoughtful than usual during certain conversations. Sometimes she appeared distracted when we talked about future plans. There were moments when I asked if everything was okay, and she would simply say she was fine. At the time, I accepted that answer because I trusted her. I believed that if something truly important was happening, she would tell me. Now those memories felt different. I wondered if I had been seeing the signs but choosing not to recognize them. That evening, I decided it was time to have a conversation. I knew avoiding the subject would only create more distance between us. When Emily came home, I waited until we had a quiet moment. I did not want to approach her with anger or blame. I wanted to understand. I looked at the person who had shared almost 2 decades of life with me and reminded myself that there was still a story I did not know. Finally, I asked if we could talk about something important. The moment I mentioned the account activity, I saw a change in her expression. It was not fear or anger. It was the look of someone who knew an important conversation had arrived. For a few seconds, the room was completely quiet. I asked why I was not included in those decisions. I asked why something involving our future happened without us discussing it together. Emily looked down and took a deep breath. She did not immediately try to defend herself. Instead, she admitted there were things she had been struggling with for a long time. She told me that what happened was more complicated than I understood. Hearing those words made me realize something important. The situation was not only about money. There was something deeper beneath the surface, something that had been growing quietly between us for years. And as Emily began to explain, I prepared myself to hear a truth that could change the way I saw our marriage forever. I sat across from Emily that evening trying to understand how we had reached that moment. For years, I believed that the strongest part of our marriage was the trust we had built. We had faced difficult seasons together, made important decisions together, and supported each other through the challenges of everyday life. That was why this situation felt so confusing. It was not just about a financial decision. It was about realizing there was a part of my wife's thoughts and concerns that I had never fully seen. Emily began explaining what had been happening from her perspective. She told me that the decisions she made were not because she wanted to hurt me or take away everything we had built. She explained that she had been carrying concerns for a long time and did not know how to start the conversation. At first, I struggled with that explanation because I still felt excluded. Our savings represented years of teamwork to me. Every dollar represented planning, responsibility, and the future we had promised to create together. I could understand that Emily had her own feelings, but I still needed her to understand why discovering everything this way affected me so deeply. As she continued talking, I started to see that the situation was more complicated than I originally believed. Emily explained that over the years, she had started feeling like our conversations had changed. We still talked every day, but many of our discussions were about schedules, expenses, work, and responsibilities. We had become very good at managing our lives, but we had not been as good at sharing what was happening inside our minds. That was difficult for me to hear because I always believed I was doing everything I could for our family. I worked hard because I wanted to provide stability. I made sacrifices because I wanted Emily to feel secure. In my mind, those actions were proof of my love. But Emily helped me understand that providing security and creating emotional connection were not always the same thing. A person can appreciate everything you do and still feel like something is missing. That realization made me think about the times when Emily tried to express concerns and I responded by immediately looking for solutions. I wanted to fix problems because that was how I had always approached challenges. But maybe there were moments when she did not need a solution. Maybe she needed me to simply listen. Emily admitted that she should have talked to me sooner. She understood that making decisions without including me created a situation where trust was damaged. She was not trying to create a separate life from me, but she recognized that keeping important thoughts hidden only made the distance between us larger. For the first time since discovering the situation, I stopped thinking only about what happened and started thinking about why it happened. I still had questions. I still needed time to process everything. But I realized that the problem was not only the financial decision. The deeper issue was that two people who loved each other had slowly stopped sharing parts of themselves. We had allowed assumptions to replace conversations. We had believed we understood each other without taking the time to truly ask. That night did not solve everything between us. It did not erase the hurt or immediately rebuild the trust that had been shaken. But it was the first honest conversation we had shared in a long time. And as difficult as it was, I knew something important had changed. We were no longer standing on opposite sides of the problem. We were finally looking at it together. After that conversation with Emily, I spent the next few days thinking about everything we had said. I expected to feel only disappointment, but what surprised me was that I also felt sadness. Not just because of the financial decisions, but because I realized how long we had both been carrying things we never shared with each other. The hardest part was understanding that this situation did not appear overnight. It was the result of years of small moments, missed conversations, and assumptions we both allowed to grow. I always believed a strong marriage meant being able to handle responsibilities together. Emily and I paid our bills, maintained our home, supported each other's goals, and created a stable life. From the outside, everything looked successful. But I began to understand that stability alone does not guarantee connection. Two people can build a comfortable life and still slowly become strangers if they stop opening up to each other. I started looking back at our marriage with a different perspective. I remembered times when Emily seemed quieter than usual, but I assumed she was simply tired. I remembered moments when she wanted to discuss something important, but I was focused on work or solving another problem. I never intended to make her feel ignored. My goal was always to protect our family. But I learned that good intentions do not always create the result we hope for. Sometimes the people we love need more than our efforts. They need our attention. They need to know that their feelings matter. Emily also had to face the impact of her choices. She admitted that keeping important information from me was not the right way to handle her concerns. She understood that even if she had reasons for feeling the way she did, making decisions without including me damaged the trust between us. Hearing her acknowledge that meant a lot because it showed she was not trying to avoid responsibility. She wanted to understand how her actions affected me. That was an important turning point for both of us. Instead of focusing only on who was wrong, we started asking a different question. How did we get here, and what could we do differently moving forward? We talked about the pressure we both felt. Emily explained that she sometimes felt like she was carrying worries alone because she did not know how to bring them up without creating tension. I explained that I felt hurt because I believed we were supposed to face major decisions as a team. For the first time in years, we were not just discussing what happened. We were discussing the feelings behind what happened. That changed everything. I realized the financial issue was only the visible part of a much deeper problem. The real challenge was the distance that had slowly formed between us. We had both been trying to protect our family, but we were doing it in different ways. I focused on building security through work and planning. Emily focused on managing her own fears and concerns privately. Neither of us was trying to hurt the other person, but we both made choices that created more distance. That realization was difficult, but it was also freeing. Because if the problem was something we had created together, then it was also something we could work on together. We did not leave that conversation with every answer. We still had financial decisions to review and trust to rebuild. But something important had changed. We stopped seeing each other as the source of the problem. We started seeing the problem itself as something we needed to face together. After our conversation, Emily and I knew that understanding each other was only the beginning. The next step was deciding what we were going to do with that understanding. For the first time in a long time, we stopped trying to protect ourselves from difficult conversations and started working through them together. It was not easy because rebuilding trust requires more than words. It requires consistent actions, patience, and the willingness to be honest even when the truth is uncomfortable. One of the first things we changed was how we handled our finances. Before everything happened, we both had different ideas about money and responsibility. I believed planning carefully was the best way to protect our future. Emily believed she needed more involvement and more space to express her concerns before decisions were made. Neither perspective was completely wrong, but we had failed to combine them. We started reviewing our financial plans together, not because we wanted to monitor each other, but because we wanted to feel like partners again. Every discussion became an opportunity to rebuild the teamwork we had lost. I also began changing the way I approached conversations with Emily. In the past, when she shared a concern, my first instinct was to find a solution. I thought being helpful meant fixing problems quickly. But I learned that sometimes a person does not need an immediate answer. Sometimes they need someone who is willing to listen without interrupting or making them feel like their emotions are a problem to solve. That lesson was important for me because I had spent years believing that providing answers was the same as providing support. Emily also worked on communicating more openly. She admitted that she often avoided difficult conversations because she worried they would create conflict. She believed staying quiet would protect our relationship, but we both realized that silence can create a different kind of distance. Problems do not disappear when people avoid talking about them. They usually become harder to understand. We started creating new habits in our daily life. We made time to talk without distractions. We discussed our plans, our worries, and even the small things we normally would have ignored. Those conversations helped us reconnect in ways we had forgotten. I began seeing parts of Emily that I had overlooked, and she started understanding parts of me that I had never explained clearly. The biggest change was that we stopped assuming we already knew what the other person was thinking. We started asking questions again. We became curious about each other's feelings instead of expecting the other person to simply understand. Looking back, I realized that the moment I discovered the financial issue was painful because it challenged the image I had of our marriage. I believed trust meant knowing there would never be surprises. But I learned that real trust is not built on the idea that problems will never happen. Real trust is built when two people can face unexpected problems and still choose honesty. The situation forced us to examine the foundation of our relationship. It showed us where we had become disconnected and gave us the opportunity to rebuild those areas. I still remembered how uncertain I felt when I first saw that notification, but my feelings about that moment began to change. It was no longer only the day I felt excluded. It became the day we finally started having the conversations we had avoided for too long. Emily and I were not trying to return to the way things were before. We were creating something new, something more honest and more aware. We were learning that a strong marriage is not one without challenges. It is one where both people are willing to face those challenges together. Months after that difficult period, I started noticing that the biggest changes in our marriage were not happening during the serious conversations. They were happening in the small moments that most people overlook. It was the way Emily and I started checking in with each other during the day. It was the way we talked about plans instead of making assumptions. It was the way we began treating each other like teammates again instead of two people trying to manage separate concerns. The situation that once felt like it could divide us slowly became the reason we learned how to communicate better. I knew we still had work to do. Trust is not something that returns overnight. There were still moments when I remembered the uncertainty I felt when I first discovered the financial changes. There were still moments when Emily felt guilty about the way she handled things. But instead of allowing those memories to create distance, we used them as reminders of what we needed to protect. Not just our savings. Not just our home. Our relationship. One evening, Emily and I sat outside our house in Denver, Colorado, talking about everything we had learned. The weather was calm, and for the first time in a long time, the conversation did not feel like we were trying to solve a crisis. We were simply two people reflecting on our journey. Emily told me that she wished she had trusted me enough to share her concerns earlier. She said she had spent so much time worrying about creating problems that she created a different problem by keeping everything inside. I told her that I also had something to learn. I had always believed that working hard and providing stability showed how much I cared. But I realized that love is not only shown through responsibility. It is also shown through presence, patience, and the willingness to listen. That conversation stayed with me because it changed the way I viewed our marriage. Before everything happened, I thought a strong relationship was one where two people rarely disagreed. Now I understood that a strong relationship is one where two people can disagree, make mistakes, and still choose to understand each other. Emily and I did not erase the difficult chapter we went through. We did not pretend it never happened. Instead, we accepted that it became part of our story. It showed us where we needed to grow and what we needed to change. The financial situation that once made me question everything eventually became the moment that forced us to become more honest with each other. I learned that trust is not about believing someone will never disappoint you. Trust is about knowing that when disappointment happens, both people are willing to face it with honesty and respect. Looking back, I realized I had been focused on protecting the future we had built, but I had forgotten that the most valuable part of that future was the person standing beside me. Emily and I had spent years building a life together, but we had to learn how to continue building our connection. Today, our conversations are different. Our decisions are different. We do not assume we know everything about each other anymore. We ask. We listen. We make space for honesty. The hardest moment in our marriage did not become the end of our story. It became the moment we finally understood what our story needed. I once believed that protecting what we had built meant preventing problems from happening. Now I know that protecting a marriage means facing problems together when they appear. Because sometimes the moments that test a relationship are also the moments that reveal its true strength. After everything Emily and I went through, I realized that rebuilding trust was not about returning to the way our marriage was before. The truth was, the way we lived before the difficult moment was part of what led us there. We did not need to recreate the past. We needed to create something stronger, something built on better communication and a deeper understanding of each other. That became our focus in the months that followed. One of the biggest changes was the way we approached important decisions. Before, we often believed that handling responsibilities separately was a sign of trust. I managed certain things, Emily managed others, and we assumed everything would work because we knew each other well. But we learned that trust does not mean staying uninvolved. Trust means being willing to share, communicate, and make choices together. We started having regular conversations about our finances, not because we were afraid of each other, but because we wanted both of us to feel included. We created plans together and talked about our goals more openly. For the first time in years, money became a topic that connected us instead of something that created distance. I also noticed changes in the way Emily and I handled everyday conversations. Before, we sometimes avoided difficult topics because we thought keeping things calm was better than creating tension. But we discovered that avoiding uncomfortable discussions only delayed the problems. Now, when something bothered one of us, we made an effort to talk about it before it became something bigger. It was not always easy. Honest conversations require patience, especially when emotions are involved. But every time we chose honesty over silence, we strengthened the trust we were rebuilding. Emily also shared more about the pressure she had been feeling during the years before everything happened. She explained that she often worried about the future and carried concerns she did not know how to express. Hearing that helped me understand that her actions came from a place of uncertainty, not from a desire to damage our family. That did not mean every choice she made was right, but it helped me see the person behind the decision. I learned that understanding someone does not mean ignoring mistakes. It means seeing the complete picture. At the same time, Emily began understanding my perspective as well. She realized that discovering those decisions without being included made me feel like I had lost my place as her partner. She understood that even when someone has good intentions, leaving their spouse out of major decisions can create hurt and confusion. That mutual understanding became the foundation of our healing. Looking back, I think the hardest part of that chapter was not the financial uncertainty. It was the realization that two people who loved each other had slowly stopped communicating in the ways that mattered most. We had been so focused on maintaining our life that we forgot to maintain our connection. But that realization also gave us hope. Because if distance could grow quietly over time, then closeness could also be rebuilt through consistent effort. Emily and I were no longer trying to prove who was right. We were trying to understand each other better. We were learning that a strong marriage is not created by avoiding difficult moments. It is created by how two people respond when those moments arrive. And every day, through small choices and honest conversations, we continued building something better than what we had before. As time passed, Emily and I began to realize that rebuilding our marriage was not one single moment. It was a series of choices we made every day. There was no perfect conversation that suddenly removed all the doubts or erased the difficult memories. Instead, trust returned slowly through consistency, honesty, and the small actions that showed we were both committed to moving forward. We started paying more attention to the moments that had once seemed ordinary. A simple conversation during dinner became a chance to reconnect. A quiet evening at home became an opportunity to understand each other better. We stopped assuming that we already knew what the other person was thinking and started making an effort to ask. That change may sound small, but for us, it became one of the most important differences in our relationship. I also began to understand that a marriage is not just built during the easy years. It is shaped during the difficult seasons when both people have to decide whether they are willing to grow together. Before everything happened, I thought commitment meant staying together through challenges. Now I understood that commitment also meant being willing to change when those challenges revealed something important about ourselves. Emily and I both had habits we needed to improve. I had to learn that protecting my family was not only about providing financial stability. It was also about creating a space where Emily felt comfortable sharing her thoughts and concerns. I needed to make sure she knew she was not just someone walking beside me. She was my partner in every decision that affected our future. Emily also had to learn that carrying worries alone did not protect our relationship. She discovered that honesty, even when it creates an uncomfortable conversation, is healthier than silence. We both learned that love requires courage. It requires the courage to admit when we are wrong, the courage to listen when something is difficult to hear, and the courage to believe that a relationship can become stronger after a painful chapter. One of the biggest surprises for me was realizing that the hardest moment of our marriage also revealed how much we still cared about each other. If we had stopped caring, we would have avoided the conversations. We would have accepted the distance between us. Instead, we chose to face the uncomfortable truth and work through it. That choice changed the way I looked at our future. We were not trying to create a marriage without problems because we knew that was impossible. Every couple faces unexpected situations. Every family experiences moments of uncertainty. The difference is how people respond when those moments appear. Emily and I decided that we wanted to be the kind of couple who faced challenges together instead of allowing them to separate us. We continued making plans for the future, but those plans were different now. They were built on more communication and more understanding. We talked about our goals, our concerns, and the things that mattered most to both of us. We no longer viewed transparency as a restriction. We viewed it as a way of showing respect. Looking back, I still remember how uncertain I felt when everything first changed. I remember wondering if our relationship would ever feel the same again. But now I understand something I did not know then. Sometimes a difficult moment does not destroy what two people have built. Sometimes it reveals what needs to be rebuilt. Emily and I were not the same couple we were before. We had become more aware, more honest, and more intentional. And that new version of our marriage was something we both chose every day. Looking back now, I realize the moment that changed our marriage was not the day I discovered the financial issue. It was the moment Emily and I decided that our relationship was more important than our pride. At the beginning, I thought protecting our future meant protecting our savings and making sure nothing could go wrong. But over time, I learned that the most valuable thing we had built together was not stored in a bank account. It was the trust, memories, and connection we created through 17 years of sharing a life. The difficult chapter we experienced became a lesson neither of us expected. It showed us that even a strong relationship can become disconnected when two people stop sharing what they truly feel. Emily and I were not strangers. We loved each other. We cared about each other. But somewhere along the way, we became so focused on managing our responsibilities that we forgot to make sure we were still emotionally connected. That was the part we needed to repair. Today, when we make decisions about our future, we do it differently. We sit together, we discuss our thoughts, and we make sure both of us feel heard. It is not because we do not trust each other. It is because we respect each other enough to include each other. I no longer see openness as a sign that something is wrong. I see it as a sign that both people are willing to protect what they have created together. Emily and I also learned that forgiveness is not about pretending a difficult moment never happened. It is about understanding what happened, accepting the lessons, and choosing not to let one painful experience define the entire relationship. There were things I needed to forgive Emily for, and there were things I needed to forgive myself for as well. I had to accept that I was not always as present as I thought I was. I had to recognize that providing for someone and truly understanding them are two different things. Emily had to accept that keeping important concerns hidden created a problem she was trying to avoid. But through those realizations, we both became better partners. When I think about that period now, I no longer only remember the uncertainty and confusion. I remember the conversations that followed. I remember the honesty that finally returned. I remember two people choosing to understand each other instead of walking away. Our marriage is not perfect, and I do not believe any marriage is. Every couple has challenges, disagreements, and moments when they need to decide what matters most. The difference is whether they allow those moments to create distance or use them as a reason to grow closer. Emily and I chose growth. We chose communication. We chose to rebuild. The experience changed the way I see trust. Trust is not the belief that nothing difficult will ever happen. Trust is knowing that when something difficult does happen, both people are willing to face it together. I once thought the hardest moment of our marriage was the moment everything started falling apart. Now I see it differently. It was the moment that forced us to stop pretending everything was fine and finally become honest with each other. That honesty gave us the chance to create something stronger than what we had before. Emily and I did not simply save our relationship. We learned how to truly be partners again.